stage for the next panel. And we are talking about something we usually don't talk about a lot here, and that is FDI and startups. Now, if we are all about angel investment, why are we talking about FDI? FDI, frankly, has been on a downturn. The numbers for 2017, 2018 saw it decline 13% globally. And FDI are the big numbers. We don't have the numbers in for 2019 yet, but I guarantee you with the US-China trade war, they are not going to be good. By contrast, venture capital, corporate venture capital, excuse me, gentlemen, I need the stage, thank you. Corporate venture capital, family offices, impact investing are all on the up and up. In particular, investments into digital technologies such as fintech are booming. Early stage is doing well. So should we just forget about FDI altogether? Well, not completely. There we go. FDI matters. Quite often, FDI, especially when it is being put into developing countries, it helps them to move up and make their economies and their industries more sophisticated. And it is a real concern for top-level policymakers when the FDI numbers tank. So, if things are happening in terms of early-stage investment, how can they support or lend something to the people at the FDI sphere? What can one learn from the other? We've got some people that are going to be exploring this important question coming up here right now. First, I would like to introduce our moderator and welcome them to the stage. That is Skylar Bostian, who is the CEO of WIPA, the World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies based in Switzerland. This is the moderator's seat, so if you'd like to come down and join us, we have a spot for you, Skylar. Thank you. Welcome aboard. You bet. There we go. Fantastic. We have a substitute speaker who's going to be joining us today, and this is from Hungary. We would like to welcome Christian Kolkeri, the Senior Advisor for Youth Strategy and Startups for the National Research, Development and Innovation Office within the Cabinet Office of the President of Hungary. Christian Kolkeri, I hope that you are waiting in the wings. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, we're going to look for Christian to make his way up here. Why don't you have a seat, relax, and you can prepare yourself while I welcome Karsten Boring, who I have seen here. He's spoken at the WBF before, does an absolutely fantastic job. He's the Associate Vice President of Listings for Europe and the Middle East and Head of Listings and Capital Markets for NASDAQ, based out of their Copenhagen and Denmark office. There we go. Karsten, you're good to go? You're good to go. Fantastic. Jacopo De Toni is the deputy editor of FDI Magazine, part of the Financial Times, the global, there we go, powerhouse in business reporting. Karsten, you're coming? He's okay. He's got a seat. He wants to bring his notes. Great. Have you got a seat yet? Good. It's coming. If you've got a seat, take them, gentlemen, so we can get right into it. Because we would also like to welcome Dr. Jarmo T. Kotelani, Chief of Planning and Monitoring at the Bahrain Labor Fund. From, of course, Bahrain. If you'd like to join us, thank you very much, and I believe we have a spot for you. We'd also like to welcome Sergio Vela, the Director of Financing and Investor Relations for ICX Invest in Spain. There we go. And last, but definitely not least in my heart, I'm making a little extra special introduction for Jeffrey Steiner, President of Angel Investors Ontario, not just because he is from my native Canada, but because when I was 19 years old, I went to do an internship with a cabinet minister on Parliament Hill, I will say umpteen years ago, and at that time, my boss's boss's boss was the youngest chief of staff ever in the history of Canadian politics. He was the chief of staff to the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development, and that was Jeffrey Steiner, the last man on stage today. And so he has a special place in my heart, one of my very first bosses, although he was my boss's boss's boss. So Jeff, glad to have you, thrilled to have our panel, and Skylar, I'm going to leave you in charge of this fine collection of people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, great. We have some people still left here. I hope we can have some good discussions. I will not introduce my panelists, I guess, because the MC did correctly, not to lose the time. Let me just give a couple of words that what we prepared as a rationale, actually. So we all know that the FDI in a global level is shrinking. Actually, from last year's revised number of 1.4 trillion, 1% even down to 1.39 in 2019. And mainly developed countries actually are participating to this shrink. So it's around 40% decline in the FDI inflows for the developed countries. And we all know that there are new types of investments that we shall focus on to be able maybe to restructure this scheme and to attract new foreign direct investments. And we are all speaking about business angels, venture capital, corporate venture capital, sovereign wealth funds, family offices, impact investments, but they all need some certain support. We've been hearing today from the main grand opening that there are a lot of issues how to access to the capital. And I had a very good conversation with Carsten before that even NASDAQ as a big company is helping to these kind of small companies to be able to access to the capital actually. I couldn't believe my ears actually. I was not sure if this is true, but obviously it works. And it's good to hear that this kind of things works. Obviously, in 2018, 320,000 angel investors invested 9.8 billion euro in Europe, and in the US, 340,000 angel investors invested 27 billion. So obviously, this is not just to neglect. Obviously, they are very important entities that can contribute to the cross-border investment if we can all help them. So I prepared some kind of, let's say, set of questions since we are in a shortage of time. I mean, it's just 45 minutes for this kind of, I would say, serious debate. I'll go with the one round of questions. And please do interfere, whatever you believe you would like to say. I want to have it, let's say, fruitful debate, not just asking the questions. So please do, if you don't agree or you agree with someone of your colleague speakers, just interfere. I like it actually. It's challenging for me, but I like it actually. So I'll start with Jacopo. Jacopo is a dear friend of mine as well, but he's a journalist. So you know, journalists, they always have some, I would say, certain knowledge, and they want to be provocative time to time, even if somebody doesn't want this. So, Jacopo, one question for you. How can a global dialogue between startup and FDI ecosystem increase cross-border investments? And I heard from you that you have some, let's say, evidences from your database of Financial Times, or how do you call it, financial, FDI markets. So please go ahead shortly.
Thank you, boss. I'll try to live up to this very kind introduction. I'll be as provocative as possible. Well, thanks. Great honor for me to be here. FDI and startups and the dialogue between the two things. I think that, first of all, yes, as a data-driven publication, we tried, and I tried personally to understand whether startups can, in the first instance, generate FDI. Can startups be foreign investors and generate foreign direct investment flows? And actually, they definitely do. Startups have been big investors over the past 15, 20 years. Obviously, there are the big tech. All the big tech, they used to be startups in their time. And we don't have to go too back in time until Facebook was founded in 2004. So 16 years ago, in 16 years, has grown to 600 billion of market capitalization and has been one of the biggest foreign investors in the world. And the same goes with the Amazons and the likes of this big tech. So they do, but not all startups are created equal in a way from this perspective. There are startups that are into services, tech startups. They are the ones that they scale up more easily. They can rapidly get to a stage where they grow internationally, globally. Actually, they can sell their products, their services, and their technologies globally since day one, as opposed to manufacturers that obviously face much bigger barriers. So if you go back to Facebook, a year before Facebook, Tesla was founded. And nowadays we see Tesla is a big manufacturer, has got much more capital investment in physical infrastructure, and has got just now is trying to build this first facility in Germany, and actually is also facing a lot of troubles, and this was today's news. So definitely tech and services startups, they can be big foreign investors. And also we are seeing that startups that come from smaller markets, obviously, for obvious reason, they tend to be much more active international investors than startups that come from big domestic markets. Obviously, a startup that comes from Denmark or the Baltic countries, they are looking for bigger markets where to grow their products and their businesses, whereas a startup that grows in the US, in China or India, they definitely try to first get domestic supremacy, and then maybe they look elsewhere, but coming from such a big market, they'll always go for the big place. So again, if we look at, for example, Amazon has been, again, one of the biggest, if not the biggest foreign investors over the past 15 years, and they have invested just in a few major regions, in the European Union, India, and a few others, but they haven't touched Latin America, or barely touched Latin America, barely touched Africa, because obviously they want the big play. Having said that, how can startups be connected to the overall foreign investment ecosystem through, for example, IPAs? I think that the responsibility of investment promotion agencies as part of government, they have multiple tasks here. First of all, they have to make sure that there is what startups are looking for. So what startups are looking for? Well, market access, but it's not in the domain of IPAs. But things like talent, things like connectiveness, things like capital. These are all things that investment promotion agencies, through dialogue with other government agencies, can push and can make sure that the decision makers have got clear in mind that these particular investors, they got specific needs. For example, I think I would like to emphasize talent. Talent is something that many people talk about talent, but is difficult to do in a very effective way. I was walking yesterday in Istiklal Avenue, the main commercial avenue here in Istanbul, and there is the old Dutch embassy. There is still a Dutch diplomatic mission, part of the diplomatic mission in Turkey, not the embassy anymore. And just outside the embassy, there was a big sign saying 7 reasons why you should study in the Netherlands. And guess what? The Netherlands, Amsterdam, and Le Hague are some of the most successful reality startup ecosystems in Europe, even though they are not incredibly big economy. This morning there was a great chart, for example, highlighting Milan, my original city, as the 65th in this startup ranking. And it doesn't surprise me. There is not much been done in Milan in terms of talent attraction and development. There is not much done in terms of developing a startup culture. We come from an entrepreneurial background where if you fail, you're done. And so I think that IPAs have got a great room, a great responsibility here to play. I give you just one final sentence. When it comes to attracting talent, it's not just attracting formed professionals. Elon Musk, he was born and raised in South Africa. Yeah. Adam Neumann of WeWork, he was born and raised in Israel. They just went to the US at college because they knew that they could get the right education that would have been the best for their professional careers.
Why Milan is in 65th, actually? Okay, I'm sorry that I'm asking you this, you are from there, but why do you think...
I think that there is a big cultural problem. I think, and the cultural problem is not just for the entrepreneurs, but also in the financial industry. This idea of venture capital and risk-taking venture capital is not really well developed, or is growing, but it's not there. Again, I think that we come more from a background where entrepreneurs, they think they got one chance in life. I was actually talking about this morning with another gentleman from Croatia, and he feels that this is pretty much the same in his country. So if you fail, you're doomed. You will always be labeled as he failed. I think that this is a big problem, because then you look at the background, the economic and social background of the city. We've been very, very successful in developing, for example, a design industry from scratch in the 60s. So in a way, those were the startups of 40, 50 years ago. So there is no reason why any territory, if can match capital availability, skills availability, connectiveness, and a cultural startup can succeed. But those elements have to be developed all together, and I think that IPAs can play a major role in this process.
Thank you. Later we'll come actually. First I would like to ask, Jeffrey was introduced so well actually, so we didn't shake hands yet, but I felt your energy. So why do angel investors play an increasingly important role? You wrote to me that actually, especially you will try to speak from the local and regional perspective, right? And later I will ask Sergio what he believes from IPAs. Jacobo was saying IPAs are crucial. So let's see, we are actually representing IPAs from all around the world, our institution. So these 2 points would be super good. So maybe Jeffrey first and then Sergio. Yeah.
Well, happy to contribute a couple thoughts. And I would say that if you slice the different parts of the spectrum of the continuity of capital, the pure angel, the first round, the second round, done by local angels, I don't think there's as much involvement or potential for the impact of foreign investment, inbound foreign investment, or outbound foreign investment by angel investors into another jurisdiction. And I'm talking about at the early stage. So many times, particularly when you speak with some governments, angel investment, venture capital, private equity, it all kind of gets rolled into one concept. But these are very different stages, as I think everybody knows. To give a little bit of background on the organization I'm involved with, so that will explain the coloring of my comments, I oversee an umbrella group that helps coordinate 13 angel groups, local angel groups in the province of Ontario. The capital is Toronto, but there's 13 angel groups covering the whole province, which is about 1,500 accredited investors. So these are all sophisticated accredited investors under law. Most of them, Bastian, want to invest locally. Their biggest motivation actually is, and they tell us, is to give back to their community. That doesn't mean they'll invest in some crummy idea or something that's going to be a failure. But first and foremost, they would like to invest in their local area. If you stretch it in a concentric circle, maybe they'd like to go 2 hours away. So if you're in Ottawa and you're interested in ICT or telecommunications technology, maybe you'll go as far as Waterloo. The idea of going all the way to Boston or Mexico City, at the early angel rounds of, 250,000 US to 2 million, the cross-border aspect does not come up in terms of capital flows, in terms of foreign direct investment. The linkages that the angels can bring to the entrepreneur, the mentoring, that certainly has very powerful cross-border elements because most of the companies, particularly in the tech space, they're going to be global in their outlook. Canada's a small market, and many other countries have entrepreneurs who come from small markets, so they have to be very internationally focused. I won't take up too much time. I'll give you the one tension, though, which is as angels make their investments, let's say they have 100, 200,000 a year that they want to put into companies, at some point the local deal flow runs out. And even just from a risk management point of view, they would look a little bit further afield for a couple of their investments. And what we've found is most of that is highly sectoral. So if the angel investors or a group of the angel investors, 5 or 6 of the 100 in a group, are particularly interested in medtech or particularly interested in some ICT subsector, yes, they'll go and invest in New York or in Vancouver only in that particular sector with like-minded people. So there is a bit of a tension when they have 15, 20, 25 investments in their individual portfolio, but by and large, the involvement of investment promotion agencies or the interest of angels to cross the border with their money is much more limited. Later, I can give some examples of where there is quite a bit of cross-border area, but it's fairly limited.
Are they actually using the services of investment promotion agencies?
Not a lot. What happens is when our angel-backed companies are doing their second round and expanding and starting to implement on international sales. And of course, sales is way more important than R&D. Everybody's always, when you're an entrepreneur, trying to make the product better and better and better. In fact, when they should be just focusing on getting revenue from that good enough, the good enough principle. Then they'll use more of our international offices of Canada, our trade counselors, Export Development Canada. But this is when the companies have already had $5, $7 million of angel investment and some family offices. They've built up, it's not a startup of 5 people. That's when they'll start tapping into those resources.
Another short question. Are IPAs actively contacting them, trying to attract their attention?
Yes, from other countries. There is quite a bit of pull. I know I was chatting at lunch about how southern France and Marseille and some other locations are looking for both investors into that area and also to bring some of our startups there. And that's one of the areas where there's incredible opportunity to escalate the international reach by this kind of partnership, by setting up in another country. And that's where some of the free trade zones or the tax-free zones and other incentives can be a pull factor, because most of these countries have to go beyond their own borders if they're ever going to be successful.
Thanks. Okay, so Sergio, we spoke before shortly about startups and IPAs and about the mandates of IPAs. Jacopo also reiterated that it's a very important role of IPAs as well to deal with, let's say, smaller companies, so the startups. So how is your, let's say, opinion on that? Is it, you have some program rising up in Spain, right? So maybe you can, through this, explain a bit how you see your role as an investment promotion agency helping to this ecosystem actually to connect, to increase the potential cross-border investments.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with what Jacopo just said. For us in Investing in Spain, the key word is talent. We think international competitiveness in the 21st century is going to be about talent. It's going to be about developing, retaining, and attracting talent. And if you want a good ecosystem, you have to develop your domestic capacities and skills, but you also have to complement that with foreign skills. And we think that that would enrich your ecosystem. So that's the way we thought like 4 years ago, and indeed we started with this Rising Up program. At the very beginning, we didn't know nothing about entrepreneurs. We were not on that. We were IPAs. We were only dealing with foreign direct investment, big multinational companies coming, maybe employment, transfer of technology, but not startups. So we start to think about this. What we did is just try to, to benefit from our strengths, which was that we have a network of 100 commercial counselors around the world, just to make an international call to see who's there, who wants to come to Spain. And then what did we give them? What was the main incentives for them to come to Spain? First of all, well, what we give is just our support, even for visas, but also for soft landing. Then we give them a co-working space. We give them also soft landing and mentoring services from a third company, from an accelerator. And then we gave them also grants, financial assistance, and also visibility in our country. With that, we had like 3 editions. The first one, we had like 100 applications. Second one, like 250. And the third one, 400. So I think we proved that we were right about the capacity to attract foreign talent. Each of those editions, we selected like 15 of those. And still, more than half of them are still in Spain and kicking it alive. But this year, we have moved into a different approach. Like this morning just was said, We think that maybe grants introduce their own incentives. We don't know if those are the companies we want to come. And we have removed those incentives. And what we've done is just to look for a private partner, strong skills in identifying talent, and also in giving connectedness to financial partners in Spain. That means investors in Spain. So that means that we think that by connecting them to national investors, we can somehow assure that they will stay in Spain and they will focus in our market and trying to grow their talent in our market. So that's how we worked. I have to say, just to give you some figures, that for the 3 previous editions, we had like 845 applications from 70 different countries. For those 3 editions, 30% of those came from Latin America, then 20% came from India, and then the rest from Europe and developed countries. This year, for example, we are still selecting. The number of companies coming from India has come down very far, very strong. And now we have more companies from Italy, from Holland, and we have more companies from USA, and still we have a lot of them from Latin America. I think, like Jacopo just said, we have a strong strengths in terms of market size, but also in terms of access to third markets, I mean Latin America. So I guess that's why Latin America has a focus in our country. And I really think that the IPAs can do this thing of connecting different ecosystems and trying to bring some benefits from that connection.
Since you are a public body, do you have I would say, solid support from your government? I mean, did they give you some additional, let's say, resources to be able to run this program? Because this is, I guess, pretty much resource-oriented program, I guess, to be able to deal properly and in a really expert manner and being, I don't know, focused on some certain sectors that you would like to attract, the priority sectors.
Well, honestly, I have to say that we didn't have any additional resources, but we managed to coordinate with other agencies within our country. So we are doing our best to try to reap all the benefits of all the resources within our country in the entrepreneurship ecosystem and try to connect the foreign companies that are coming through our Rising Up in Spain program to the other agencies and also to connect to other startups and accelerators as well.
What is the most significant sector that you attracted these applications that you just mentioned?
Most difficult.
Most, let's say, significant.
Most significant sector. Well, I think Spain is very, as you probably know, we are very good at tourism, and we are very good also at financial. We have very strong banks and international financial companies. So we have a lot of fintech, progtech, travel tech, and edtech as well. Also we are seeing a lot of interest in all things having to do with Internet of the Things.
Okay, thank you. Now I'll go to Christian Kölkedi. High Ventures, right?
No.
Huh?
No.
No?
National Research and Development and Innovation Office.
Aha. Okay, because Christian replaced another speaker, so I thought you come from the same. I hope this question will fit to you properly, actually. How do you see the role of, I guess this should be very much technology-oriented, how do you see the role of the digitalization in your field, and what are the implications in both the short and the long term? So what industries you believe are most affected by this, and how quickly corporate business models and operations changing? So some concrete examples about the industries and how we can cope with it, because we know that startups and small companies, the scale-ups, they are not really so much in line with the new technologies and the new models.
This is a complicated question, but first of all, I think I will join and acknowledge the thoughts who has been said before. Like, I think the most important is talent and education, because if we can try to develop the ecosystem in the beginning, not in just intervening in the top of the ecosystem, but we are starting with our youngs and educating them to dare to use new technologies, dare to search different ways, and be your own explorer of the world. When they are leaving the high schools, the universities, they have a different mindset, and they are thinking and seeing the world differently. And not all of our youngs going to be startuppers, but those skills which are needed to be someone to be a good startupper are usable at different levels as well. And I think when we have the new generations and we can compete with their lack of and thirst for knowledge with classic methods, we have to use digitalization like e-learning platforms and try to reach them different new line teaching methods. For one example, e-learnings, but for to make the startup ecosystem trendy for them and make them wish to be a successful entrepreneur, we have to show them new role models. And I know that it's far from what was the question, but I think the most important base of a startup ecosystem, on any ecosystem, is the new generations to come in 5 years or in 10 years. So I think when we have to finance new startups, we have to start with educating the next generation startuppers, and then we have to embrace them as a national startupper to use digital technologies and use more digitalization to build a new line of startup companies. And that's why first steps first, but in slow steps, that we can revolutionize, I think, the industrial connections between startups and the industrial ecosystem as well.
Can we attract, for example, everyone is speaking about talent. To the third time I heard today talent. Are we able to get the talents, let's say, with some online platforms? You know, in Denmark, for example, the Copenhagen Capacity is doing a lot. Simply, they developed a system that regularly attracts new talents. Do you believe this is a good idea?
I think the key is, as you said, digitalization and the new platforms, because 10 years ago, we had to gather talent in small communities, then in counties, and then in country level. But now, as the information sharing 10 times faster than 10 years before, we can gather talents from abroad much easier than 10 years before. So if we found a complete platform, we can make working groups as well. Like, I think in my vision, in 5 years, we can make startups, successful startup teams with 5-6 founders from 5 or 6 different countries as well, because they just don't have to meet all the time, 8 hours a day. So I think gathering talent is important, and it's faster when we're using digital technologies. But then we do not just have to gather talent, we have to educate and grow the talent ourselves. And in a utopistic ecosystem, we don't have to speak about how important is the foreign investment, because it doesn't going to taste like foreign if a startup is based in 5 different countries right from the start.
Okay, so this goes a bit against the born global, but yeah, it's hard to be clever, I guess. Jarmo, I don't know you personally, I guess, but I will ask one question. Since we spoke about the different types of investments now, for example, now I saw that you are coming from the Labor Fund. How do you see this idea of, let's say, financing the startups or scale-ups, or let's say, in your, let's say, ecosystem?
Okay, well, thank you. Let me be a politician and answer the question that I want to answer, rather than the question that you asked of me. But rest assured, it'll be a variant of your question, and indeed what we've been what we've been talking about. And I think this is the, if you like, the question of the hour, the question of the day for the Gulf region as a whole, and definitely for Bahrain in that context, with some country-specific idiosyncrasies. And I think the interesting question is, you know, to what extent does it make sense to try to connect this idea of driving the startup ecosystem and promoting foreign direct investment, and for a whole host of reasons, I actually think that this is in many ways the logical posture for the Gulf countries in general, and certainly, and in some ways particularly for Bahrain in that context, in the sense that the Gulf countries, of course, are somewhat usual in the global context in terms of having very deep pockets. There are very large, deep pools of both public and private family, individual capital that in many cases has existed for generations. So in a certain sense, the need to import capital as money alone certainly is not the same as it is in, for instance, in some other emerging markets. On the other hand, the Gulf countries, as much as we talk about the numerous young generations and the demographic sort of bulge, are population-poor countries. They have lots of money. They have relatively few people. At the same time, of course, they are countries that are now really amidst a new chapter in their historic transition away from monocommodity economies, in other words, oil producers, towards something else. I think a little bit early to say what that something else is, but it has to be an economy that is much more diverse and much more underpinned by productivity rather than input accumulation, which is what has really driven growth in the past decades. So in that sense, I think the reality is that the Gulf countries, to make this journey towards diversification and greater productivity, and to better utilize this relative advantage of financial capital that they have, really need to target talent. And I think in some ways, I can imagine there might be dissenting voices, but that is a logical posture for economies which really, throughout their millennia-long history, have only achieved sustained prosperity by being open. And of course, can today boast some quite internationally well-known success stories of what openness can buy. For instance, Dubai starting as a relatively unknown quantity and creating a regulatory and a living environment that has now turned it into a hub for people from all corners of the earth. And finally, what I would say is important about adopting this posture is the fact that the Gulf countries, given their idiosyncrasies, one of the areas where they can hope to build a significant competitive advantage going forward, and where, quite frankly, they will have to do so if they are to complete this economic transition, is regulatory competition. In other words, adopting rules and regulations that appeal to investors, that appeal to entrepreneurs, and make it possible, make it easy for these countries to successfully position themselves as a platform, an attractive platform for people who at some level are sort of geographically agnostic as to whether they produce the services, I suspect increasingly services, but also the goods that they might want to produce. I think in the services area, the case is fairly clear. But of course, even in the goods area, what the Gulf countries can offer is kind of a front row seat to the emerging markets world of Africa and Asia.
Why do you think these markets, especially Gulf countries and let's say you mentioned Dubai, are able to attract that many talents? I mean, of course, as you say, there are few people as the locals, so they need obviously somebody, but how come they understand the need? Let's say they are for many years now in a pretty leading position to bring some new ideas, let's say startup ecosystem or angel investors, and they are very active on it. How come they find these trends so quickly and they develop, I would say they quicker develop than the developed market sometimes?
Well, again, this is a very big question. I'll try to give a concise answer, but I think a lot of it really has to do with the sort of relative uniqueness of this economic journey that these countries have been on. So if you have built your prosperity on a single natural resource, which one day is either going to run out or become unappealing to your consumer base, you have to come up with something else. And given the natural endowments and the population base of these economies, you didn't have a lot else to work with. So I think there was, in many ways, a bold decision to try out new ideas, whether it was free zones, it was regulatory innovation, it was attractive living environments, or whatever else. And given this broader geographic context, it's an idea that seems to have paid off, and it's been tweaked further, and I think gone regional in some ways beyond the region.
Carsten, they say that we don't have much, so obviously we will have a bit less than 45 minutes. So what would you say? I explained that before, you told me, and I was shocked at how you deal with all these small or startups or scale-ups in your platform. What do you think are key success factors for the countries or regions and cities to be active in this field, actually, and to be able to really enable these smaller companies to get access to the capital? And because we all know that they are not really, okay, you told before to me that you give them some kind of like advisors, financial advisors, to be able to cope with some requests. So maybe if you can explain a bit, I guess it would be beneficial to hear.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it has been a very good topic so far. It's all about talent. And I will say talent comes in many ways. It's not only people, it's also talent, money. It's also smart money, and that's why we need to have foreign investments in all countries, because we need to learn from other mistakes and other findings from other countries. And what is really about when we are running exchanges around the world, we run NASDAQ markets in the US, and we of course also have 7 exchanges in Europe as well. And in the Nordic region, we run Denmark, Sweden, and Finland, and we have this smaller platform called First North. So it's the first step for many companies to get capital on a broader level, not only for 1 and 2 business angels, but for maybe 2,000 different people. But in reality, it's always anchored within business angels. There will always be some people who have believed in the company, built the right skills into the company, and made it more globally before it can attract money for a lot of people. If we go back in time to the mid-90s, an average size IPO or listed company was around 200 million euro. That's small, 200 million euro. Today is 2,400 million, an average size company on a stock exchange. So we needed to do something different to attract small companies and benefit from our ecosystem with transparency. We go back when you need to convince talent to move to another country, or you need to attract talent money into another country. It's all about trust. And being an exchange, we have built on trust for so many years because we need to be very transparency. So that's our key word, transparency. And even though this is small companies that we are talking about, and we have listed more than 500 companies since 2005, and they are all below 100 million euros. So they are pretty small, and many of them are not even bigger than 30 million euros in market cap, raising about 10 million euros So what we do is, of course, trying to build up a community where there's transparency. You can see all the figures, all the results from the company. They need to disclose in the same way so that big companies have. We know that there will be less information, there will be less investors in these companies, but they have a platform to build on.
Would you suggest that, and agree maybe with what Jeffrey said, that they would first invest locally, and then when they would feel ready, they would go more globally?
I must say that if you take Denmark, Sweden, and Finland, we are 20 million people. In Istanbul, there are 17 million. So
even more, I would say.
We are small countries, and we know from the beginning that the country is not big enough for us. So many Nordic companies are born globally because they need to be globally. So that's maybe why we are so happy to seek investors from outside the world. We also embrace people from outside the world, outside our country, because we need investors within our field, and there's not enough, for instance, in ICT investments in Denmark or in Sweden. So we always are going out, but there will 99.9% always be a local anchor investor in these companies. But then, because we are so talented in Europe and we have many startup places around the world, and especially the last few years, there has been some fantastic startups communities in almost all countries in Europe. It is spreading very fast. If you take our fintech companies that are listed in Copenhagen, they know people in Madrid, they know people in Zurich, they know people in Amsterdam, they know people all over the place. And then, of course, when you have transparency built into your system, there will be investors from all over the world coming in. If you look at our trading platform, 70% of our turnover on the Nasdaq exchanges in the Nordic region is coming from outside the Nordic. 50% of the ownership in all our listed companies is coming from outside the Nordic region.
So obviously your companies are attracting talent first, obviously.
It's always a fight about talent.
Can I ask each one of you, because now the MC will come and say, let's stop, but really with one sentence, what do you believe is the most crucial to bring this, let's say, smaller and bigger communities together, so FDI and business angels, that would help to both of these communities to attract more investments in general? But really one sentence, because otherwise we will be sent out of the stage, I guess. Please, maybe we can start here, Karsten, and just go one after another, yeah.
Education and share your findings.
Thank you.
Talk to each other.
Thank you.
Education, more information sharing, and more events like this.
Yeah, I'm not good at one sentence, but I would say that from an angel perspective, you start by acting local, but you must always be thinking global. And that's where I think the investment promotion agencies and the angel networks around the world can help between the continents for companies to grow and expand more quickly their distribution, their partnerships, their markets. And so there's a great opportunity tapping into those incredible networks.
Jarmo?
I would say certainly as far as you're referring to government entities, which I'm not sure you are, but this is very much the case today in the Gulf. You want people to work together, you give them joint KPIs. And don't let them come up with their own, certainly not for this area.
Thank you.
I agree with education, and I think also in the Spanish case, public-private collaboration partnership has also been very instrumental to foster the ecosystem.
So obviously the panel was very positive, and what we believe, obviously, when we hear the word talent, it means it's all about people. So it's all about connectivity, it's all about how we see the situation. So if we see the situation positive, so we need to plant the tree much, much earlier to be able to enjoy the shadow later. So thank you very much for your attention, and yeah, thank you. Big applause to the panel.
Thank you very much, and a round of applause also for our moderator. Well done, well done. Hey, it's a very well appreciated moderator. Thank you very much for your efforts. You guys did a great job, and yes, I do like the positivity. I have dubbed this, the 20s are going to be the decade of angel investment because of the work of people like we have on stage right now. So thank you.